Hello, Live at Fivers. It's Peter McLaughlin with BlueSky Hypnosis. Today is Friday, so it's Friday Live at 5. Glad you're here. If you have questions, if you have comments, please put them in the comments in the chat section. It's what makes this interactive. Even if you just want to announce and say you're here, it's really cool because I've noticed that sometimes it takes a while for people to comment, and it's like talking into the void, and that's pretty rough. Today we're going to be talking about inspired by Halloween coming up in just a few days. Is death affecting your life? And which one of us has not been affected in some way by death, by the fear of death, by death happening to people that we love, people that we know, watching the news, watching entertainment? It's a fact of life. And it's one of those things, Shakespeare called it the undiscovered country from which no traveler returns. Fascinating topic, and there's so many different ways in which it can affect us, ways that it can control us. It can cause tremendous amounts of fear and anxiety that can then affect us in a myriad ways. So today we're going to be talking about all of that, and most importantly, the things that you can do if this is something that's really bothering you, if it's really holding you back in your life, ways that you can overcome that, for want of a better phrase. Standard disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. I am a hypnotist and a life coach. I've been doing this work for 16 years. Everything that I talk about on these broadcasts is really coming from my own firsthand experience working with a couple thousand people over that period of time. And the feedback that I'm getting from them when they're in hypnosis, the feedback I'm getting from them when they're just talking about their lives, the commonalities between them, what seems to unite us as humans, both in terms of what really bothers us and the ways that are successful in surmounting these sorts of things. So I say there's three big buckets to your life. There is your physical and mental health. There is your business life, your money life, your financial life. And then there's also your relationships. Those would be your significant others. Those would also be, could be your kids, could be your siblings, could be your parents, and your friendships. So we all at some point are going to struggle in some of those areas, and there really are commonalities between people, even though we're individuals, even though different things make us tick. And over time, I feel like I've discovered certain things that are of value to the people who come later. So without further ado, let's jump into, is death affecting your life? Halloween, that's what got me thinking about this. I walk around in the neighborhood in which I live, and there are decorations everywhere, which is awesome. People love this holiday. But the decorations, when I really look at those decorations, they are largely associated with death. So it's very common to see a skull and bones laid out on somebody's lawn, skeletons hanging from a tree or sitting in chairs, in front of a fire, gravestones. These things are clearly all associated with death. I mean, there's another element to it too, which is there's a sort of evil part that's associated. So people get dressed up as the devil. People dress up as serial killers and mass murderers, and they walk around with, Freddy Krueger masks on, and Jason in Friday the 13th. Is that what it's called? with the knife and the hockey mask. And it's remarkable because the holiday is largely geared towards children. And I just am looking at it through a kind of different lens, if you will, that I dressed up and went out for Halloween when I was a kid, and our kids dressed up and went out. I'm not saying this is terrible or bad or wrong or anything. I'm just looking at it through a different lens. And the lens that I'm seeing this year it's about death. And when you look into what are the origins of Halloween, this is the time, I think the Celts may have called it Samhain or Samhain. And I may be getting this wrong, so please bear with me, but I believe they believe that the distance, the filter between the world of the living and the universe or the world of the dead was at its thinnest at this time of year, as in the Northern Hemisphere, we're moving more into winter, which is a kind of death, and that these spirits of people who had recently departed would come back and visit their old homes and the people that were there, and they wanted to protect themselves against these things, and so it was believed that they would put on masks to protect themselves against these spirits. So suffice it to say, Halloween, there's a lot around death. It's a major aspect of this holiday that we've kind of commercialized. We've brought children into it. There's also, I think, an aspect of evil that goes all the way back to when this began and continues to this day. So that's why I thought that we would talk about, is death affecting your life? And if so, how? So if you're on this call right now and death has affected you and continues to affect you in a certain way, like maybe, when I was writing out the different ways that it can affect you, the different ways it can control your life, certainly your nervous system, right? You could be in a state of anxiety, either here and there or kind of all the time, because it's always in the back of your mind, or maybe even it's always present. Or maybe it's in certain circumstances, like when you get on an airplane, this fear of death just overwhelms you. Maybe you have really bad nightmares, and the nightmares involve someone chasing you, trying to kill you, or maybe the nightmares involve you actually dying. Maybe it's that you have suffered a loss and you're going through grief. The other ways that death and this fear can control you would be socially. It might be that because you're in this constant state of anxiety and stress, and the sort of the existential reason is death, you're afraid to go out of the house. Maybe you're afraid to go into a job interview. And I'm not saying that everyone who has these fears, it ties back to death. I don't believe that's the case. But certainly for some people, maybe even many, that is a component of it. It certainly affects you mentally. And it can affect your health. If you're in a constant state of fight or flight, if your nervous system is always in the sympathetic stress response, that's going to affect you dramatically in terms of your health. How can fear, especially fear of death, be used to control you? This one is absolutely fascinating to me. That you can, when you're afraid, and let's face it, death is kind of one of those unifying fears, because we all know that no matter what we do, we're going to die at some point. That if a person is afraid of dying, their neurology, our neurology, because we're herd animals, tells us to go to the herd, that's where safety can be found. And not just physically be with the herd, but also be with the herd in terms of our philosophy, our viewpoints, our opinions, the way maybe we even vote, the choices that we make, right? These are all things that when a human being is when a human being is feeling fear, they move towards compliance, if you will, towards being perceived in every way possible as part of the herd. I'm not saying everyone does this when they're feared. That's the natural response for a human. That's the natural response for any herd animal. And in this way, people are easier to control when they are afraid. Another way is the limiting of taking action, of speaking your truth, right? So if you're afraid, you're less likely to say something that you think is going to alienate you from another person or from other people, that's going to mark you as other. You're less likely to take action that you're not sure if that action is going to be quote unquote successful, or there may be a risk associated with it, and now that risk is kind of amplified in your mind. It also, according to a study that I came across from 2016, fear of death makes people more punitive. So people are more likely to engage or to approve of political violence, including war, if they themselves are afraid of dying. It makes them more retributive. It makes them more, as I said, more punitive, more desirous of revenge. All right, let's see if there are questions here. Hello, Joyce Shaw. Good to see you. Sarah W., good to see you too. Margaret B. from Winnipeg, glad you're aboard. Sarah is saying, as a society, we have often moved death from our home to places like a hospital or hospice. That has increased our fear of it because it doesn't seem normal. She says that previous generations witnessed death and integrated it into their lives as a normal endpoint. And she says, I can confirm what you're saying about fear of death. As a near-death experiencer, wow, I'm so much less afraid of both death and living. That is so cool. We want to hear more about that if you're willing to tell us. Yes, I could not agree with you more. That it wasn't that long ago in terms of evolution, maybe 100 years, maybe 150 years, that people largely lived on farms, and there weren't this class of experts. So if a animal dies, guess who's dealing with it? You're dealing with it. You're not taking that animal to a vet probably. You're going to be trying to treat the animal, and if the animal dies, you're going to be burying the animal. If you're harvesting the animal for its meat, you're probably the one that's killing that animal. You might even be hunting. I mean, I know people still hunt now, but hunting was probably, I'm going to say, a much more widespread practice when you really needed that to put food on the table, when there weren't supermarkets. When a family member died, you were probably the one who was digging the grave on your land. You and your family and maybe your friends and your neighbors were the ones that were actually conducting the ceremony to bury that person. It wasn't like the person, has an incident, they go to the 911, ambulance, EMTs, the police come, they pick up this person, they bring them to the hospital. A person, let's say, passes away in the hospital. They go to the morgue in the hospital. A funeral home is contacted. The body, without you being present, goes to the funeral home. The funeral home then prepares the body so that it's more presentable, if you will. I think that might be a term that would be used. Puts it in a suit, drains the blood, does all of these things to make it look like the person's sort of, in quotes, still alive. And then the funeral home conducts the funeral. You go to a church service maybe, and then you go to a gravesite where the grave is already dug. And there's a ceremony at the gravesite, and generally speaking, people then leave, and then the professionals, other people, then actually bury the casket and the body. It's made much more antiseptic, as I think Sarah was saying it so beautifully. And when you are divorced from something so natural like death, it becomes more opaque. It becomes more strange in that sense, something more unusual. And anything that we're not super familiar with, I think, is something that we're largely going to be more frightened of. So that's a really, really important point. And I'm really thrilled that you brought that up, Sarah. Thank you for your comments. Here is Chrissy. Chrissy, Legal Eagle. It's so good to see you. It's been a while. I hope you're doing well. Legal Eagle here. Ever since I saw a dead body rise from a coffin due to air caught in his lungs, I have been petrified of death. Okay, so this is a really good example. If we want to jump ahead, which we do, because of your comment, to what do we do about these things? How do we resolve the fear of death? Well, first of all, I want to put this into context. This is just, again, my opinion based upon my experience, but I think all human beings fear death to a certain degree. It's like you could probably say that all human beings fear, to a certain degree, riding in a car. Let's say all adults. I'm not going to include babies or infants. But I think we all know, excuse me, that when we get into a car, there is probably a small percentage chance that there could be an accident. And then there's an even smaller percentage chance that it could be a fatal accident. And so there is an awareness, I think, in most of us who get in cars that could happen. And I would guess that for most of us, it's a small enough percentage chance, and we have learned to kind of put that out on the periphery so that we're not thinking about it all the time. And then there are other people along that continuum that have a fear of death that probably ranges from mild to medium to intense. I've definitely worked with a number of people who have the intense fear of death when they're in a car. So with any kind of fear like that, Legal Eagle, we want to get to the root cause of it. So what you're saying is that you were at a wake or a funeral and you saw the body, I think you said, sit up. And later it was determined there was some air in the lungs and that caused this body to move in that way. Well, we would want to go back in your mind, in your consciousness, to the moment at which that happened. That's where we would heal or resolve that incident. And essentially tell your subconscious mind that it's no longer a threat. Because right now, that's how your subconscious mind is perceiving that. It's perceiving that incident as a threat. It's drawing larger conclusions from it. And that's creating that intensified fear of death, I would submit. So if we were to resolve that precipitating event, you being at that wake or at that funeral and seeing that kind of really astounding thing, that fear is likely to go down right with it, because we are telling the subconscious mind, this is not something you need to be frightened of anymore. This is not something you need to protect this person from anymore. You can stand down. So thank you so much for that comment, and it's awesome to see you. Welcome back. All right, let's see here. Here is Acelib says, "Hey Peter, and all just listening today. Glad you're here. Feel free to comment if you wish." Sarah W. comes back and says, "What came after death for me?" Sarah is the person who just said she had a near-death experience. That's where, if you are being monitored by medical diagnostic equipment, the technicians, the doctors, would be able to say that for a period of time, this person, this patient, doesn't have any brain waves and they don't have a heartbeat. That's the definition, the clinical definition of death in our culture. And so many people who have this experience and then they are revived, return to this plane of existence changed in the ways that Sarah is talking about she was changed. They talk about having a period of consciousness while they were physically dead. This, again, if we leap all the way forward to another aspect of resolving the fear of death, or at least significantly diminishing it, is when you can have an experience, either an out-of-body experience, or in Sarah's case, a near-death experience. Or I would submit too, that when people have a regression, when they do a past life regression, when they do a spiritual or life between lives regression, it's telling or reminding a certain part of the subconscious mind, hey, when I died in that last lifetime, I didn't cease to exist because I'm here right now. When I died in that last lifetime, and you can do this in regression, I remember going through a tunnel. I remember moving into this beautiful place that felt like heaven. I remember meeting with beings of light. I remember meeting with loved ones who had passed before me. I remember I didn't lose my consciousness. And again, according to studies, it seems to show that this can substantially diminish the fear of death, is when a person has an experience like this. And I'm not saying you have to have, like Sarah did, a near-death experience. That's a very intense experience where a person is actually dead. But there are other aspects of our human existence that can provide something that's similar to that. So it could be a hypnotic regression. It could be an out-of-body experience. It could be something with a hallucinogenic drug like ayahuasca. There are people that talk about doing an ayahuasca trip and they come back and like their fear of death is gone, or they were an alcoholic and now they aren't anymore because something cracked open in their consciousness. Einstein said, the way you solve a problem is not at the level at which it was created. You always solve a problem permanently at a higher level. And so my belief is that when people have an OBE, out-of-body experience, or they have an NDE, near-death experience, or sometimes when they do a hallucinogenic like ayahuasca, or they do certain kinds of regression, that they are literally doing that. They're going to the higher level, not the level at which the problem was created, the person sitting up in the casket, but a higher level. And at that higher level, it dissolves the fear and the problems and the conflict at the lower level. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see here. Here's Sophia Tavares. Hello, Sophia. I don't know if I had died or not, but I had one amazing experience, a part of many. So, Sophia, if you would like to share with us what that experience was, I'm sure I would love to hear about it, and I'm sure other people would too, and we can certainly dive deeper into that. Here is Miriam. Miriam, good to see you. Let's see here. Very good to see you too. I find it very interesting that tarot sees the death card as transformation and always connects the new beginning of a new cycle to it. That is a really great point. And in the psychological literature, they talk about one of the ways of reducing the fear of death as changing your relationship to it. And I would say that your experience with the tarot is very similar to my experience with hypnosis and with doing regression. So I'll give you guys a quick example of that. My daughter, many years ago, was very, very sick. Nobody really knew what was going on with her. And we were working on every possible level to help her heal from this. And I was doing kind of spiritual hypnosis with her, regression work. And I remember this one particular moment at which she had met with her spirit guide. And I had her ask her spirit guide, what did she need? What was it that she needed? And the spirit guide said to her immediately, you need to die. Well, I can tell you as a parent, hearing that, and I think she was like 14 at the time, hearing that from your daughter saying this as the guidance she's getting was very scary at first. Fortunately, I had done enough of this work at that point that I knew to dig deeper. And so I had her ask, what part of you needs to die? And the answer again immediately was, the old fearful part of you needs to die so that the new part of you can live. And I think Miriam brings up a really, really important point here, that the death that we see in the Northern Hemisphere, the death in quotation marks, of fall, late fall and winter, where the leaves all fall to the ground and everything looks like it's dead, always leads to the spring of rebirth and renewal. Kind of like my daughter's guide was saying to her, that part of you needs to die so a new part of you can take that place, can live. And I think in our culture, in our culture, death is absolutely feared, probably more than in other kinds of cultures, especially indigenous cultures, where people had or have a different relationship to the universe that they cannot detect with one of their five senses. I can't pretend to know a lot about Mexico. I went there a couple times last year, loved it, and they have a festival, a Dia de los Muertos, and they have a skull will be depicted in their artwork. And my understanding is that this is a day that they honor the dead. This is a day that they bring their dead relatives and the dead loved ones into their consciousness and appreciate them. Well, I see our culture as turning the closest thing we have to that, Halloween, into something that's like candy and trick or treat and scary this and scary that, all for fun. And I also see our culture as the culture that is obsessed with, and I'm not, like, I was a volunteer firefighter and an EMT for many, 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 many years in 2 different states. I taught my kids about fire safety. I taught them about safety in cars, and I still have kids that will carry a fire extinguisher in their car. Not many people do that. I don't even do that. They'll carry, tools to break a window if you need to get out. Like they're aware of this thing. But we can take what I would call the cult of safety too far. And I think part of the reason that we do that is we're so afraid of death. And if we go too far in one of the extremes, then we start to shut down our lives. We don't really actually live. We stop living on the altar of not dying. And I don't think that is a super healthy place to be either. All right, let's see if there's any other comments here. Sophia came back here, says, I was laying on my bed just relaxing with my eyes closed, and all of a sudden I heard a breath. Wow, this is cool. It's almost like an episodic story. Each episode rolls out. Tell us more about this if you want to. Did you just hear one breath? Was it really loud? Could you feel the breath on you? Did you ever figure out whose breath this was? All right. Here is Red Rover. Red Rover says hi to Peter and hello to everyone. Well, hello to you too. Kansas City Chiefs fan, looks like. Cool. Great team there. One of the points that I wanted to talk about today, and I've kind of touched on this, is I put it out as a question, which is where did I put it? Is diving deep into entertainment fear healthy for you? Okay. So for me, this is kind of like eating ice cream. So ice cream is awesome. I love ice cream. I know that if I ate ice cream 3 times a day, maybe even if I ate it every day, it wouldn't be so good for me. And I think the same thing is true for the whole industry that we have of fear, like horror movies, for example. There's an old saying, I don't know who said it, but it's basically stare not too long into the abyss, because the abyss is staring back, is looking back into you. In other words, we are affected not just by what we eat, we're also affected by what we take in through our eyes and what we take in through our ears. There's that statement with food, garbage in, garbage out. Well, I say it's the same thing with what we are consuming in terms of media. So if you're consuming media that is hyper violent, that is depicting kind of heinous acts, that is depicting evil, that will actually, especially over time, begin to kind of rub off on you. It will begin to affect you. And there's a really interesting, I think, concept of a thought form, meaning that as a human being, we can create a thought form, or we can kind of take ownership, or the word possession, I guess, that's kind of an interesting word, of a thought, and infuse the thought with energy. And the energy that we infuse that thought with kind of breathes life into that thought form and creates almost a form of life. Not life that you could see, taste, touch, hear, or feel. Feel with your fingers kinesthetically, but a life form that could actually control you to a degree. So if you were walking around all day and you were saying that you were very unlucky, or you're not worth anything, or diets never work for you, or some other calamitous thought, those thoughts can then influence your mind, and then in turn influence your emotions, and in turn influence your body, and in turn influence your behavior for either good or for ill. An example of this was, I was working with a client about a year or two ago, and it turned out that he had a thought form that was kind of attached to him, almost like a life form attached to him, that had occurred when he watched the Jack Nicholson horror movie, I think it was Stanley Kubrick, director, called The Shining, that a scene from that movie had essentially embedded itself into his mind and was creating and creating a component or a portion of his generalized anxiety, and was fueling that anxiety. It wasn't the only cause, but it was like this parasite hanging on that came from a film, that came from a movie, which was absolutely amazing when we discovered this, when we found this. It's going to move this guy. When we found this out, and we needed to clear that out of him. And when we cleared that thought form out of him, he felt this kind of amazing relief, this lightening of his physical body. And I would say that a thought form is very similar to the concept of an entity attachment, a spiritual entity attaching to oneself. That thoughts and this phenomenon are sort of intertwined with each other. All right, let's see if we have some more comments here. Here is Donna Parsons says, she means breathe, not breath. Okay, so Sophia was saying, I was laying on my bed just relaxing with my eyes closed, and all of a sudden I heard breathe. Okay, she heard breathe. Gotcha. A male voice or a female voice, or do you know? Were you afraid? What was it about breathing, do you think, that this thing was trying to get you to do? Do you think that this was something that was trying to help you? Do you think this was something that was trying to hurt you? All right. So thanks for that clarification, Donna. Appreciate that. Red Rover says that was a really great point, Miriam. That was about the tarot. And then here's Sophia saying, oh yeah, I don't know what that was, but it was interesting. And it helped me with the death anxiety that I suffered for 4 years. That is so cool. So you're saying that this voice that came to you and said, breathe, helped you with the fear, with the anxiety of death that you had been dealing with for 4 years. What else helped you, number one? And I guess number two is, they say that fear and the breath cannot coexist. That when we're afraid, we tend to freeze, we tend to hold our breath and then breathe very shallowly. When you breathe deeply, it is said that breathing deeply and fear cannot coexist. So maybe this was a spirit guide that was speaking to you. Maybe it was a deceased relative. Maybe it was an ascended master. Maybe it was God. Very interesting though. Super, super cool. You've got someone that is looking out for you. I think we all do, but you were able to connect with this being, which is so beautiful. Here's Sarah saying, reminds me of Dr. Emoto's water crystal experiments. Yeah, okay, so Sarah's referring to this Japanese scientist who froze water took samples from different water sources. So from polluted water, from clean water, from water that had been prayed over, water that had been put in a jar or a beaker with the word I hate you on the outside of it, with the word I love you on the outside of it, and then took this high-speed photography of these ice crystals as they were melting. And at a certain point in that process, this high-resolution photography revealed that the water would take on different crystallized shapes depending on what the water source was, polluted or clean, and most interestingly, over whether the water was prayed over or it was put into a container that had certain words written on it. So if a sample of water that was frozen had the words I hate you on it, it would freeze and then be captured as like this distorted, twisted kind of ugly crystal. The same water from the same source put into a different container where they wrote I love you on it would create this absolutely magnificent, gorgeous, beautiful, amazing snowflake, maybe even like jewelry. They could even take water from a polluted source and have, in this case, a Buddhist monk pray over it, and it would turn otherwise distorted water into beautiful water. And Sarah is 100% on point here, because we are mostly water. So how can we have certain words coming out of our mouths, ugly words, ugly phrases about ourselves and others, beautiful phrases words about ourselves and others, and not have that affect our physical bodies, not have it affect our brains and our thinking process. And I think this is one of these tantalizing linkages about the power of positive thinking and its effects on you, the effects on your health, and so on. It's absolutely amazing. What you consume through your eyes, what you consume through your ears, garbage in, garbage out, beautiful in, beautiful out, affects your life dramatically. And for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Emoto, Emoto, or haven't read his work, you might want to check that out. It's really seriously interesting stuff. Thanks, Sarah. Really appreciate that. Amy McFarland says, redirecting our inner dialogue is one of the most important things we have to master in this lifetime. Hear, hear. I agree with you entirely. That's a really important thing you just said. Thanks for that. Red Rover says, I have never been scared about dying, even as a kid. I got very ill at age 21, and I was not expected to live more than a year at most. Oh my God. That was 35 years ago, so I guess I had more to do here on Earth. Yes, you absolutely did. And what you're saying here is consistent with the literature that I was reading, and it's consistent with what other people have said, that sometimes encountering to a degree, or going into the whole concept to a degree, like having a near-death experience or facing one's own mortality like this, can have the effect of dissipating the fear. So yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. Kelly Katzis says, hi, Peter. Hello, Kelly. Glad you're here. Red Rover's talking about Amy. That's so true. Absolutely. Rio 7. I hear my intuition or a spirit guide once in a while. It comes as a voice. I don't tell people very often because it sounds insane, LOL, but it's not. You make a really interesting and important point here, and that is fear, right? That how fear rules us. That to some degree, because we are herd animals, our very survival depends upon us fitting in, right? Not being seen as the outsider, not being banished. This goes way back in our distant past, that to be banished, to be sent off by yourself, meant death. It certainly means that for children. And this is still alive inside of us. And it can control our behavior, the way we dress. It can control what we say and what we don't say, what we do and what we don't do. Our opinions that we share with other people and what we keep to ourselves. And you were saying, you have this experience, it's real to you, but you have a fear of saying it to other people because you don't want them to think you're insane. And I often wonder, if knowledge is power, is certain knowledge being kept from us because the people with that knowledge would then have a power differential over us? And are we being preyed upon, in a sense, to fall in line with an official narrative? And that to step outside of that narrative is to risk being alienated. It's to risk being banished in some sense or another. And so I would put that under the heading of how fear can be used to control you. So yeah, you make a really good point. I would say that our culture largely is one of five senses. If we can't detect something with one of the five physical senses, we largely say it doesn't exist. And yet we know that so much exists outside of the realm of our five senses. And if you hear something inside your mind, how do we know that that's not true? Why are we programmed to kind of mentally and maybe even physically push people away that say things like that and do things like that? You know, one of the things I've mentioned on here before, I heard it as a joke, that in our culture, it's the most common thing in the world to pray, to go into a church, for example, and to pray to God. But if God talks back to you, you're considered to be insane. Isn't that a little silly? Like, why do we think, oh yeah, it's okay to say something I can't detect with one of my 5 physical senses exists beyond those senses, and that's why I am sending out prayers, a non-physical message, but that if I received an answer back to that message, now I'm crazy? That sounds a little wacky. All right, thanks for that. Here is Kelly. Kelly says, when do we know we have learned all the lessons and ready to meet the other side loved ones? I really miss them. Sometimes I feel I don't belong in this world. It's too harsh for me. I don't think you're the only one. I've definitely talked to many people who feel like this, and I believe it, this is a rough place. You know, that Earth seems like it's both heaven and hell simultaneously. And it seems like, to some degree, where we put our attention determines what comes back to us. As to your question, you know, when have you learned enough that you can meet with your loved ones? And I would say, for me, my experience is that this is not a function of how much you've learned, that you could meet with your loved ones today. You know, you don't have to die to meet with your loved ones. You can go into a trance state, whether you get there through hypnosis or meditation, or you get there through Qigong, or you get there through a psychedelic, or you get there through a dream, like a lucid dream, or you get there through prayer. The most important element is back to Red Rover. I think it was Red Rover was talking about intuition, is not doubting yourself, accepting what comes to you. So that if you're in a hypnotic trance, if you're in meditation, if you're in a dream, and a beloved person who's passed away comes to you, I say treat that as real. You know, it's not real on a physical 5 sense standpoint, but it's real in an expanded sense of reality. That's how I view it. Right? The microscopic world is not real to our eyes. We can't see it, but it's still real. You know, we have microscopes that prove that. Just because we don't have the equipment necessarily to prove some of these things doesn't mean it's not real. And these things like dreams and different kinds of trips actually have a physiological effect on your body. As I always say, how can something fake have a real effect on you? Doesn't the seed have to be real to produce a real plant? If A equals B, does not B equal A? So I have come a long way in my thinking on this. And I believe when people have a dream and they say, oh, you know, Uncle Larry was there in my dream and it was so good to see him and it felt so real. I say it felt real because it is real. Not real on a physical 5 sense level, real in a larger sense of reality. I mean, my God, look at the size of the planet we're on. Look at the size of our galaxy. Look at the size of our universe. I mean, if there isn't a larger sense of reality other than our 5 physical senses, well, we already know there is. It's already been proven. So I say you can meet with those people now. And I even have a track on my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis. Subscribe if you haven't. It's around grief. It's around healing grief. It's around meeting deceased loved ones. People, one of the tracks, and the other track is meeting a beloved pet who has passed away. You can do this. And if it doesn't happen the first time, it's just like trying to ride a bike. Sometimes a kid rides a bike the first time, and sometimes it's the 15th time. Stick with it. You can do this. I promise you. Okay. Let's see who else is here. Here is Bewust. sign. I have had many dreams where I died and left my body. And I also have out-of-body experiences at night. And therefore, I am not afraid of death. For me, death is simply another kind of existence. Yeah, I mean, I could not have said this better. You said this beautifully, perfectly. Death is just a different experience. And perhaps, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what you said. You said death is simply another kind of existence. And in all the literature, they talk about people who have had out-of-body experiences or something similar to that, tend as a group to be far less afraid of death than those who have not had those experiences. And the point is, we all have this ability. And it may be a lucid dream for one. It may be an out-of-body experience for another. It may be a different kind of dream. Excuse me. It may be a different kind of dream for someone else. It may be hypnosis or meditation. But you can do this. And the tools are all around us in a way that it may have been harder, 40 years ago, 20 years ago even, to have these experiences. Now it's all right here for us. Sorry about that, guys. Here is Donna Parson, 500. I knew so many people who saw deceased relatives and deceased friends in their homes just before they died that I know heaven exists. Yeah, this is beautiful. We benefit so much, in my opinion, by communicating this with each other, because it gets to that point that Red Rover made. When you feel like you're in a silo, you feel like you're the only one having this experience, and that if you were to say this to someone else, they would look at you askance, they would think you were out of your mind. The more we can talk to each other, the more we realize, hey, wait a minute. Why was I taught this other thing, that this is so unusual, this is so weird, when, 25% of the people I know have had the same experience or something similar, or 50% of the people I know have had an experience like this. When we open up to each other, it becomes safer for the other people to say something. So, kudos to those of you like Donna, who is fine with talking about this, with Red Rover, who's fine talking about this, with Sarah W., who's fine talking about having a near-death experience. I mean, the more we speak about this, the more we encourage other people to share their experiences. The more we normalize what is normal, So, kudos to you guys. Kudos to all of you guys. I really appreciate this. Cookie Thieves says, hi, Peter. Hi to you, Cookie Thieves. Glad you're here. I love this handle. Mind can troll. I do not fear death. In fact, I never really liked to be here in the first place to begin with. Death to me means liberation, free from conditioning, and the ultimate recognition of yourself. That's a beautiful way, I would think, to live one's life. To live one's life as free of fear as possible, including the fear of death. So mind can troll. Are there other fears that you have that are significant, or are you largely free of fear? Like, do you fear being alone? Do you fear being seen as strange? Do you fear being in public? Do you fear flying on a plane, driving over a bridge? Do you fear speaking in public? Do you fear destitution, poverty? Do you fear pain? Would love to hear if you feel like answering some or all of those questions for us. That would be really interesting. Here's Kelly is saying, how much can a deceased help us? I don't think that's a question. I think that's a statement. And I agree with you that getting beyond the perceived limitations of our consciousness can help us immensely. That we can ask questions of our inner guidance, regardless of how you conceive of this. Now, you may be religious, particular kind of sect, way of thinking, philosophy, belief. That's really wonderful. You can get guidance from ascended masters, from beloved beings and entities within that belief structure, within that religion. If you are more of a spiritual person, a spiritualist, you can get spirit guides, you can get angels, you can also get ascended masters. You can talk to other versions of you from other lifetimes. You can talk to deceased relatives that you were very close to, ones that you admired, ones that you trusted. The only thing that shuts it down is a kind of disbelief, where we say, that's not possible. I can't be seeing what I'm seeing right now, either with my physical eyes, but normally with your inner sight. I can't be hearing what I'm hearing right now. I can't be feeling or sensing this intuition. I'm just going to push it all away. That is the biggest way to block us. The next biggest way is fear. Fear shuts down, generally speaking, all of these capabilities, or greatly diminishes them. And this is another way we can be controlled. Okay. Thanks, Mind Control. Appreciate that. And Kelly, too. Rio7 says, real in 5D is different than what is real. I would agree with that, too. So before, I want to take a couple more comments and questions. Before we do that, I just want to talk about next week, because we're almost at time. And next week we are going to be doing the hero's journey. So most of you probably haven't heard of Joseph Campbell, but most of you have probably heard of Star Wars. So Craig Lucas, who is the sort of genius behind Star Wars, was heavily influenced by a man named Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book called The Hero's Journey. The reason why Star Wars and many other popular films and stories appeal to us so powerfully is that they recreate the base myth underneath all the cultures of the world that Joseph Campbell came to call the hero's journey. The idea is that each one of us, you and me, we are all on our own version of the hero's journey. And understanding the basics of the hero's journey can really help you in your own life when it comes to resolving old pain from the past and from realizing your most important goals. So we're going to be discussing that next Friday live at 5. All right, let's take a couple more here. Cookie Thieves says, where's this? Put that up there. Death is affecting my life. I have had many people in my life die all around me, and now my mom is really sick. She's kind of dying, and she keeps saying that she won't make it to 70 years old. Wow. Wow, I'm really sorry to hear this. I mean, this is very human, and I think we can all understand to a degree the kind of pain that you're going through with this. And it's times like this that really do try our souls. And I think the only thing that I can offer here is the track that I mentioned before on my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis, which is about grief, is maybe that this track can help you resolve some of that grief. I do work with clients one-on-one, and part of what we do is we resolve old pain, including grief. Any kind of faith that you may have, I think going deeper into that can really help to blunt the sharp pain of death and the grief that goes along with it. It can't eliminate it, I don't think, but it can blunt it. It can make it better. And certainly healing the grief of the past is a big component of this. So you're not carrying around the weight of all of that. And with your mom, it's not easy to change someone's mindset, but if you're able to kind of take what she says, hear what she says, maybe even validate what she says, and then pivot into something else, which is, part of living is a mystery. And it's a blessing that we don't know when we're going to die or how long we're going to live. And that gives us the ability, if we want to choose to do that, to live more fully in the moment. When my dad was dying a number of years ago, his wife came to me at some point when he was really, like, he was under hospice care. He was at home, but he was under hospice care. And he was kind of going in and out of consciousness. And he was unconscious, and she was filled with tears, and she was understandably, distraught and saying, what am I going to do when he's gone? And because I had read the book, The Power of Now, by Eckhart Tolle, I was able to say to her, I understand this must be really, horrible for you, but he's here right now. What would that be like if you just went in there right now? You took this time, you took this moment to be with him. And she got this kind of faraway look on her face, and she turned and she walked in to his room, and she sat with him. She kissed him. She put her arms around him. She told him that she loved him. And she was able to, in that moment, transform it, not from pain and sadness, but she was able to take what was right in front of her. And I just thought that was a really beautiful moment. So, maybe there's some way that you can talk to your mom and help her pivot from the fatalism and from the fear to what she has right now. I'm not offering this up as perfect. I don't even know if it's going to work. It's just what's coming to my mind as something that might be helpful. And I hope it is. Okay. Red Rover says, Rio is right. This is where it gets really difficult. When you don't have people around you who are in the same frame of mind as you are. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We're here to support each other. No man is an island. John Donne said that. We all need each other. And one of the things that I love about a forum like this, large or small, is that it connects us on a different level. It connects us on, in some ways, I think, a very human level. And as I said before, it helps us to realize we're not alone. So thank you for that. Kitten in the Moon. Most people don't fear death. What people really fear is the manner they will die. Well, that's certainly true that a lot of people fear the manner in which they will die. And a lot of people do actually fear the dissolution, the disappearance of their ego. They fear nothingness. Other people actually fear what will happen to them after they die. So some people fear that they will go to hell. Some people fear that they will go to purgatory. Some people fear that they won't be admitted to heaven. So there really are different kinds of fear around death. And I do agree with you that one of those is some people fear the manner in which they will die. So thank you for that, Kitten. Let's do one more. Here is Mind Control. I fear not living an authentic life, but I'm afraid that's already happening due to the conditioning of life itself. Thus why I don't really like the limitations of this life. Unpopular opinion, I know. I wonder how unpopular the fear of not living an authentic life is. Certainly when they interview people at the end of their life, overwhelmingly, people will say, I really wish I had spent more time with my friends. I really wish I had spent more time with my family. I really wish that I had taken that trip to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia that I always wanted to do. I really wish that I had pursued a career in blah, 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 instead of playing it safe. So you could say that is regret at the end of life about not living an authentic life. So maybe you just have more awareness of it at presumably a younger age. Something to think about anyway. I just want to thank all of you guys for tuning in today for Friday Live at 5. I really appreciate your participation, especially those of you who commented, who asked questions. I really, really appreciate seeing you guys here on Fridays and for sharing your stories with us. The stories about like Sarah W. with the near-death experience, with Cookie Thieves talking about how death is surrounding her in her life right now, and about Rio, afraid of looking like a fool or looking like insane if he or she were to talk about certain things. So I just want to thank you guys for your participation and hope to see you next Friday live at 5 for the topic, The Hero's Journey. Take care. Have an awesome weekend. Bye.